So the 5 features of emerging adulthood are...
Oh, really?
Wow.
If you roll back 150 years, we don't even have the categories that we are throwing around now.
No, we don't.
They didn't exist.
One of the sad things coming out of the literature is just how few older adult friends many emerging adults have. Again, I think churches can do this better, but we've got to be careful, I think, about the generational sectioning out of people where...
I've watched a fair share of reality dating TV shows.
Okay.
And,
I'm not sure I'm qualified to deal with this, Graeme. You might need to get some other guest.
Kia ora koutou and welcome to Lunch on the Way. Today we had the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Sam Bloore to the podcast, and he's talking about emerging adulthood. If you use the term young adults, well, maybe it's a bit outdated because there's this period of time from about 18 to 35 where adults are emerging as adults. And what he talks about are 5 distinct features and phases of emerging adulthood. And this will help you not only understand yourself, maybe your kids or your grandkids better, but certainly if you are a leader or a pastor within your church, it'll help you understand how to disciple emerging adults better. And you do not want to miss this conversation. Sam was an amazing partner to talk with, Graeme and I, and we had so much fun. He's a great conversationalist, really articulate, was a medical doctor back in the day, and now is a phenomenal thinker for the church in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Well, anyway, here's that conversation with Sam Bloore.
So just to be clear in terms of how you look at emerging adulthood, it's not a generational slice like these terms we're using now. So what we're using terms like Boomer, Gen X, Millennials, Zennials who come after them, Gen Z, Alphas is it that are coming after? I
call Gen Z Zoomers.
Oh, Zoomers.
It's just a fun little thing because I like to make fun of Boomers.
Right, there they go. But what Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, when he first put forward this idea that a new life stage had developed between adolescence and adulthood, he was saying this is going to happen no matter when you were born. This is going to happen to you. This is a life stage thing. It's not a generational slicing thing. So as I came across, and we can cover off what some of the features were, but I remember reading them for the first time and just thinking like I'd had my mail read. I was like, I could have been the poster boy for emerging adulthood. And so he puts out this first paper in 2000 where he says the decade, more or less the decade of the 20s, from 18 through to mid-20s, has changed so much in a couple of generations that we're really seeing the development of a new life stage. In the same way that adolescence wasn't always there. Adolescence was sort of described in the late 40s through to the early 60s. Where people sort of saying, hey, look, a new life. People don't just go from being kids to adults. There's adolescence now. As people started to move from farming communities into move into cities and receive further education. They weren't thrust into those responsibilities younger. Adolescence emerged.
Because this is all part of the 20th century change, isn't it? I mean, if you roll back 150 years, we don't even have the categories that we are throwing around now.
No, we don't.
They didn't exist. So as modernity or the modern world has unpacked itself, technology and all the rest of it, you've got these developments. Would that be fair to say? Yeah,
and some of those things have gone on to affect the emergence of emerging adulthood or the development of that has evolved as a new life stage, partly because of some of those same changes. So one example, I was thinking about this morning as I went digging for a couple of books. Graeme, you and I are at least old enough to remember New Zealand having quite a manufacturing industry. Yeah. It was dreadfully inefficient. My economist friends tell me it was done at great expense to the New Zealand consumer. But as a lot of that manufacturing moved offshore, and the same happened in North America, this was one of the things that Arnett described, people moved from work with their hands to information-based work. That sort of slowly happened. And you needed to train longer for that. You didn't tend to train on the job in quite the same way as you apprenticed.
Yeah, so the apprentice type thing. I mean, that's kind of interesting now, but we won't go there about how that kind of could end up rolling back again as well a little bit. Yes. But I was talking to somebody yesterday, Louise, who's South African. We have a lot of immigrants in New Zealand who are like diesel mechanics, fitters and turners, because we don't have them anymore.
Right.
But we grew up with that.
Yeah. And so there were a bunch of things that meant people were training for longer. They were staying longer in school and then university or doing apprenticeships. And this is, men and women, because you had the women's movement of the 1960s and 70s. And whenever I talk about this, I put up an image of Rosie the Riveter, who was the blue overall wearing, red scarf wearing woman who was helping for the war effort. And there was a real mobilisation of women into roles that had traditionally been done by men. And they did them phenomenally. But they moved out of those industries when all the guys came back from the war, and so went back to sort of teacher, secretary, waitress. There was sort of a handful of jobs. But again, I'm old enough to remember the Girls Can Do Anything campaign of the late 70s and early 80s. And by the time I went through med school, none of your business years ago, half of my class were female, more than half were female then. And so women had decided that they were going to train too. They were saying, hey, well, we can do anything, and we're going to study, we're going to get degrees and things like that. We're going to do our own apprenticeships and things before we start having families. And so what a number of these changes has done is pushed the average age of marriage out about a decade from what it was in the 1960s, early 70s.
So 1960s, early 70s, people were being married around about 20, 21.
Yep, exactly right. Yep. 20 and a half
so now you're
for
talking about
women
30,
and 21 and a half for guys.
Yeah.
And so now that's moved into the early 30s. On average, there will be exceptions that, prove the rule. And actually Christian communities are probably one area where people do tend to get married a bit younger. I think
and there are probably reasons for that too.
There are reasons for that.
When did you get married? When did you get married?
I got married at 25.
Yeah. How about yourself?
I was 36. Like
36,
I could have really,
I was 22.
Okay.
And then we have some audience members who smiled when you said they got married younger in Christian communities, so maybe they got married younger too.
Well, and again, there's some reasons for that. I think one of the reasons, obviously, depending on which denomination you're a part of and what version of the Christian sexual ethic you hold to, there is a sense for many Christians that sex belongs behind the paywall of marriage, and so people are, obviously holding out for that. I think they've also got, if they're lucky, they've got wise people around them helping them to actually realise we're good. I'm in a relationship. I don't need to try 3 or 4 more relationships. I've actually found someone who's really good for me. They've often got people speaking really honestly into their lives, saying there is no perfect person. You're joining this thing so that iron can sharpen iron, and you can have the rough edges knocked off you, and so you actually you're able to step into that with a few more people around you than perhaps others enjoy.
So those are some factors that has been pushing out this young adult or emerging adult age. So you're saying there's teens, there's young adults, then there's emerging adults, and then there's somewhere after that adulthood. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
So has this, so what you were saying, this emerging adulthood, the category that you're describing,
it's either childhood, adolescence, emerging adulthood.
So you kind of Erickson and those sort of theorists have, they're pushing up against that, really, aren't they? Because they were the kind of standard kind of measuring sticks.
Yeah, I think they're building on that. So one of the things that Erickson would say is that identity exploration happens in adolescence, and Annette sort of picked up on that and said, actually, I think that's that exploration is happening longer. So it's actually saying times have changed since Erickson did some of his work, and he's right in what he identified, and he's a bit of the grandfather of it. Very revered in that sort of developmental space. But I think some of the commentators are saying that is stretching out. So the 5 features of emerging adulthood are identity exploration, instability, self-focus, feeling in between, and then possibilities and optimism. And I can run through a little bit of that, and we can go back and forward with some of those. There's a part of me that's reluctant to use identity exploration. I think when you, again, your worldview and your way of being in the world is so just now deeply grounded in who Christ is, you get nervous about sort of using identity language outside of the caveat that our identities are grounded and found in Christ. But the literature uses that term to say that this is a time of life where people are exploring particularly work and relationships, so work in the short medium and long term, sense of career. What do I want my contribution to the world to be? You're starting to discover who you are, where your gifts and talents lie, where they don't lie. You try things out and go, gosh, I'm never doing that again, either because you find it just repugnant, the work, or you realise you're not suited to it. You're starting to explore those things, and you're starting to explore relationships as well. You're starting to say, what kind of community do I want to live in? What sort of person, if I'm looking for somebody to be a partner in life, what sort of person am I looking for? And that has traditionally come under a label of exploring aspects of identity. And so that's happening later than when Erickson was describing it.
Yeah, so the idea of happening later, sort of is that the later when a person leaves home and goes to university or goes into the workforce?
Well, that context matters, because when you're talking about identity, what I think of is, whenever you change contexts, you aren't sure of who you are, because your identity is actually formed by your community, right, not just by you.
Sure thing.
And so when I went to university, there was a level of confidence that I had in who I was and what I was about because of the community I was around for 4 years.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you move somewhere else.
Yes.
And it's not that I wasn't sure of who I was as a Christian at the time as a pastor, but it's almost like there's a rediscovering.
Yeah, I think you got a good point there.
There's a rediscovery aspect to just moving contexts.
Yeah.
And I wonder if people in their 20s are a lot more transient now than they used to be.
I mean, this is really good, Joe. We could do a whole other podcast around identity, and I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on that. And people, it's slippery. The term around identity is slippery. And in fact, one Christian psychiatrist, a guy called Glenn Harrison, who some of his work I've come across, and I really enjoy how accessible he makes some of it. So he's involved in psychiatry. He says actually there's no agreed definition around what identity actually is, but it does. He boils it down to a sense that we carry of being one and the same person, almost no matter what context we go into. That there are aspects that we change, but actually there's a core of us of who we are. Mm-hmm. And I think you've nailed it, Joey, in saying that's bestowed on us. We don't create that. Yeah. We don't manufacture that or even discover it for ourselves necessarily, which is one of the reasons I'm nervous about using that identity exploration language as though I'm off to find myself. I think the Christian understanding of the world and of the human person is very different to that. And I think one of the cultural challenges we're up against.
I mean, that's sitting in the culture, isn't it? That idea that you just said.
100%.
I'll go off to find myself.
Yeah.
So,
make it up as I go along.
Which can be a whole lot of different things too.
Yeah. And many of the things that are being placed at the centre of that identity just aren't capable of holding the ontological weight of personhood, right? They just can't carry the weight of who we are as people. And so, we're seeing some of that come unstuck. And I think as Christians, we've got to be careful not to be playing a bit of sort of I told you so or taking any glee in watching that kind of unravel, but be there in some theological and pastoral ways to actually point people towards something that is worth grounding your identity truly in. Yeah.
So why this topic? Why emerging adulthood for you? Like, did you just interact with a bunch of people in their 20s who weren't so sure of themselves, or like what was going on that really propelled you into this?
Yeah, look, there are a few things. I was working for the Venn Foundation at the time, and my wife Julia and I, we were the residential hosts of that program. We did that for 11 years, that work, and absolutely loved it. We're still, real supporters of their work. I'd had interactions with some of the staff here at Laidlaw, and sort of had interactions. And I just found that most of the people I was interacting with were in their 20s, and by definition, they were in this kind of category. Yeah. But I came across it just by chance. A friend asked me if I would help to deliver a paper for a chaplaincy, a course for a chaplaincy diploma that they were offering. And so I got to read a book on all the life stages of the human person, from cradle to grave, because you can be a chaplain in lots of places. You can be a school chaplain, you can be a hospice chaplain. There are lots of places within the human experience from beginning to end that you can do chaplaincy work. And I saw a summary in that book of what Arnett had proposed, and I read it, and that was when I had that moment of going, oh my gosh, this is me. So three things happened as I went back and read Arnett's original book. I realised all of the things he's talking about, I absolutely experienced into my 20s. Yeah. Secondly, everyone I was interacting with at Venn and other places was in that demographic. And then thirdly, I was reading the book at 42, and an alarming number of those features were still present. You know, they don't evaporate on your 30th birthday. And, you know, Joey, you and I we were chatting on the phone where you were sort of saying you're moving out of that category. But as you read some of those features, you'll still go, no, there's aspects of that still in my life now. They hang around. And so, I was just determined to learn a bit more about it.
Would it be sort of pushing a little bit to ask a little bit about your own narrative and your own journey? Because I think, as we've talked, I think it kind of really earths these ideas, and not just ideas, but is embedded in your own experience. So, I mean, you trained as a medical doctor. Do you want to unpack that a little bit for us? Sure.
Yeah, I think I could be careful and not sure whether my mum's going to listen to this. My dad's not with us now. He's been gone 15 years. But I think growing up, my folks were awesome. What I wish they'd done a little bit more of, though, was be directive and not in an overbearing way or in a trying to live their life vicariously through me, but almost the opposite, going, actually, what are the things that you're really good at? You know, what are the things that really spin your wheels? What areas would you be really well suited in? So by the time I left for university, I had sort of, my faith had definitely grown pretty cold, and I didn't, you know, church wasn't a feature of my university years. But also, I sort of went into medicine because I'd heard it was quite hard to get into. Thought it was a bit of a challenge. Gave it a crack and got in. And then you're on the sort of conveyor belt a little bit. You started in your first year. We jumped into second year classes down in Otago, and away you go. You sort of come out the other end 6 years later, going, you know, where did $100,000 go?
Wow.
And then you're sort of in it, and you're trained, and you're going for about 15 years later, so actually after I'd come back to faith and left and moved into church-related work, one of my sisters, she's an occupational psychologist, she took me through, organisational psychologist, she took me through Myers-Briggs. And I realised that none of mine map onto what a doctor is in Myers-Briggs pretty much at all. You know, now you can be a doctor whatever your Myers-Briggs thing is, but I'm a very distractible ENFP, and so happily I'd found my way into emergency department, which is about where you want to stick someone distractible because there's lots going on. There's lots of kind of flashing lights, and actually the other staff keep you on task. Like the charge nurse will grab you and say, "Hey, listen, you need to be in cubicle 3. There's something going down," and so you. But I actually, for many of the disciplines of medicine, it's just a terrible match on who I am as a person.
And did you feel a discomfort, a sort of...
I mean, I enjoyed it. I love the people. Doing medicine's a very privileged position from which to...
I suspect rewarding too.
Yeah, observe the human condition. You meet people in a very vulnerable time of their life, and you're able to learn a lot from them. And it can be rewarding when you feel like you've met them in that place of need. And then, you know, coming back to faith in my late 20s, it was a sort of a call out of that rather than a push from not enjoying it. So I'm pleased to say I sort of left on a really good note of medicine, and I look back on it really fondly. Yeah. Maybe if I'd done another decade, that might not have been the case. I might have, some of those tensions might have really grown to be frustrating. But that's more a sort of a personal observation of going, I'm not sure if I had my time over, whether I'd
what would you, if you'd known what you... I mean, that's a very hard question because we all have our life, and I don't think we try to relive our lives. But if you had knowing a little bit what you know now, and you known your own capacities and orientations or motivations, what would have you done?
I think I probably, and I've ended up doing a fair bit of this anyway, so the Lord moves in mysterious ways. There's something involving communication, pulling ideas together, trying to do that creatively. I mean, that's what I try to do now when I'm in sort of teaching in other modes. Maybe something with a bit more of a focus on things like the classics and
so finding out where humanities much more than
the sciences.
The sciences,
But do you still
that's a much more simple way of saying it, Graeme. Thank you. I'll take that into my next conversation.
But do you still have a stethoscope in your car in case somebody wants you to listen to their heart?
How many years ago is it now? 9 years ago, I had some chest pain overnight.
Yeah.
And I'd gone for a run the night before, and it hadn't felt that great. And I put that down to being in my 40s and, just feeling a bit sluggish. But the chest pain, any medical people listening, it was positional. So it was a certain position, and then I'd move and it would go away. And it happened about 3 or 4 times in the night. And we just had our we had 2 kids under 2.5, I think, or under 3 or something, and so I was just dog tired. So I just slept through the discomfort. But in the morning, I thought that was a bit weird, and had a listen. And I still had the stethoscope, Joey. So I put it in, had a listen, and I felt a heart murmur, and I was like, oh, that's not normal. So headed off to the GP, and long story short, earned myself a trip to the cardiologist eventually. It wasn't urgent, but a few months later, and had an ultrasound and ended up having a mitral valve repair about 9 months later.
Oh,
so
really?
Went under the knife, had the full sternotomy and everything, and that was just a congenital condition that had finally decided to blow out.
There we go. So it's all worked out. $100,000 later, you diagnosed yourself.
What price do you put on that?
Oh, I know. Well, one of my friends is a nurse, and he's kind of skilling up within nursing and is in the emergency department.
Okay.
And I said, I was to the doctor the other day, and they had the resident come in to listen to my heart because it was like a Velcro noise.
Oh,
And he's like, can I take a listen? And I was like, you can take a listen. Shirt off in his living room. He's like, oh yeah, I hear that. I'm like, you medical people just love listening to hearts.
That's called a Hammond's crunch. I diagnosed that once in a kid.
Yeah.
And the pediatrician came down to the emergency the next day, bought me a bar of chocolate, said that's... And the only reason that I a very distinctive sound is that my boss had shown me one in Whangarei Hospital, and I never forgot the sound. So when I heard it in this kid, I was like, I know that sound. Yeah. It sounds like a chip packet being crunched.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, anyway, we won't go into it anymore. I'm fine now.
Thinking about this with your journey, as you reflected on that, what are you pulling from that journey in, so your own narrative, this piece of research that you've done, and then bring that together? What's some of your reflections about where we're at in terms? Yeah.
So look, I mean, very quickly, I'll touch on those other 4. We talked about identity exploration and the fact that people are working out who they are. I'd throw in for Christian communities that people are actually they're stress testing their sense of worldview and belief and understanding as well. So it is a time of individuating that out and saying, did what worked for mum and dad work for me? Did the stuff I heard in my church, is that going to carry me? Is that... and one of the things, I'd put out there, and I'll have some book recommendations a little bit later on, but for parents is to make sure they're having really wide, broad, deep, rich conversations with their kids, or finding people who can. And I think my particular denomination didn't really leave a lot of room for some of those really big questions. And so if the first time you come across someone who's prepared to really go deep with you on a thorny question is in a philosophy class, then that's the person who gets to speak first into that, And so I think showing people that the church has got a long history of grappling with some of these parts of life. And so that's an aspect of identity exploration. Instability, and this is just, things are up in the air. They're changing. You mentioned about how much you were comparing the stability of some of that uni life with perhaps others who bounce around a little bit more and what that happens. But even uni life can be unstable, right? Generally a new flat each year, depending on which housemates you've got and where you're going. You can be in a hostel one year and then somewhere else you can move. And so people will generally live in more locations in their third decade of life than any other decade.
Oh, really?
And so you'll move around a lot. So
by third decade, you mean your 20s?
In your 20s.
Yes.
Yeah. So your 30s generally tend to be more settled.
More settled. Now, again, as I said, I was really 36, getting married. It does go out. But my 20s, I was in a new accommodation every sort of 6 months to 12 months. You'd be somewhere different.
You got pretty good at packing then.
You did get good at packing. Yeah.
So instability.
Self-focus means that you can make decisions and really not have to involve anyone else the way you do when you're living at home, or later when you're married at 25. All of a sudden, you've got someone else to take into account. I was able to shift my job from Whangarei Base Hospital and take up a 6-month rotation in Perth, and I did that on 6 weeks' notice.
Yeah.
You know, because you can. It's not meant to be pejorative. It's not selfish or self-absorbed. You can just focus on yourself. You can make decisions without as much having to take others into account.
Yeah, that was probably the one that I lamented the most, to be honest.
Losing?
Losing.
Yeah.
And you lose it a little bit when you get married, because obviously you can't just focus on yourself, because you have a partner that you're married to, so you have to be others focused. And then when I had kids, I was like, holy crap, I'm selfish. I was like, dang, I had a lot of time to do whatever the heck I wanted. And now it's like, it's gone.
Yeah, I do. I mean, again, I'm a lot older than you, but I do remember that too, in getting married and having kids. And one tipping point was, two brothers going off and they're sailing from Tauranga to Auckland, and going, I can't really do that because I've got responsibilities, and so I mean you could, but those are the levers that are pulling on you, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And I think the longer you've got that freedom.
Yeah, the harder.
The thicker the brick wall you hit when it goes, hey?
I imagine, because guilty pleasure moment, I've watched a fair share of reality dating TV shows.
Okay.
And
you might need another whole podcast.
How you go there, Joey?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to deal with this, Graeme.
I won't blame anybody else. But if you want to talk about a study into people, like you said, with medicine, right? It was like, whoa. And a lot of these people who go on these shows, it's like the last kind of step, because they're like, I've tried everything, let's go on this show and see what happens, right? So they're in their early 30s usually, sometimes mid 30s, and a lot of them, it's like they're so self-focused that they're like, I want to find the person who fits like a glove into my life, where I have to give up nothing.
Right,
and if I can't find that person, it's not going to work out. It's not meant to be. And I'm like, then you're never going to find a person. Then you're never going to get married. And so that self-focus bit, I wonder, is a really big one. The older, like you said, the older you get, the firmer and the stronger the wall is built. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that tends to happen when we talk about these is, because the pinch points often happen in the negative, all the features can come across as though they're negative.
Yeah.
And Arnett didn't mean them that way.
No,
so he's not saying these things are negative. And actually, there's a great joy in being able to focus on yourself in that time, and that's the time to do it.
Yeah.
So I was involved in pastoral ministry prior to working at Venn, and we had, I'll keep this very vague so that I don't identify anyone, but we had 3 people, men and women, a mixture, leave their families and just go off and sort of seek their fortunes in their mid to late 30s and early 40s, because they hadn't had a chance to do it in their 20s, and they felt like they'd missed out on this almost this cultural promise that was being offered. They felt ripped off. They felt like, hey, I never got to do that. And the wake of destruction that they left by doing it then. So it's a good thing to actually do the self-focusing then. Then's the time to do it. That's the time to be able to.
So, I mean, well, not that we need to go there, but each of those categories you describe, and to me, I theologically start to sort of think about, like with stability. So stability is both good. I mean, but there is a degree of even the biblical narrative in the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. There's a period of of stability, and there's a period of instability. It's part of the journey. So it's part of formation. It's part of growth, isn't it?
We're sitting doing this in Auckland, which is the most house ownership obsessed city in the country, where I think it's become idolatrous, to be honest. And I think there will be, and I think some of the millennials and younger will carve the way, and actually really challenging some of the assumptions of their parents and grandparents about what the Lord requires and is asking of them. And when home ownership is such a marker that you've made it, I think we're going to have some younger people actually go, no, I think you guys missed a trick a little bit, in being able to be a bit more responsive to what the Lord wants us to do and when. And so, anyway.
That's quite literally exactly what we talked about with Greg.
Yes, we about the kind of...
There's a freedom. Like there's actually a freedom in not being tied down like that, and you can just prompted by the Spirit and go.
It's both. It's both and sometimes, and I think people have to really listen and know what's God asking of me, because I think you can idolize the other too.
You can.
And that can become a bit of almost a camouflage for a restlessness and I've got to keep moving all the time. So both of them can become that way.
Yes, I was saying each of those things, they're it's a both and. Really.
100%. There are positives and negatives.
The sense of the self-focus.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily wrong, but actually there's a whole lot of other good that needs to be experienced as well. And to be just so focused, I guess the cultural myth of this being the dominant thing, and I have to go and search in, which is the story, the narrative you just sort of pointed to, of like cultural myth comes like a tidal wave in, and I feel like I've missed out.
Yes.
It's a lie.
Yeah, that's right.
But
it really is.
Like you say, the devastation that follows pursuing that myth is devastating.
Yeah.
And then we've got number 4, which is feeling in between.
Feeling in between.
Yeah.
This one is almost 100% subjective, and that people report it.
Yeah.
And so if you ask people in their 20s whether they've reached adulthood, the earlier it is in the 20s, the more ambiguous the answer you'll get. So you'll get something like, some will say yes, very few will give you a flat no, but a majority of people aged sort of 20 through to 23 will say in some ways yes, in some ways no, or that depends. I am sometimes, and sometimes I'm not. I use this line so many times when I speak on it. I've just been promoted. I've got 8 people under me at work, but I had ice cream for tea last night. Like Mum would be horrified. There's this mixed feeling of I'm sort of slowly getting there, but I wouldn't say I'm fully adult. And that, the statistics show quite clearly that starts to shift as you move through the 20s. So more than 2/3 are saying an unambiguous yes by the time you get to 27, 28. Right. But still about a third are saying, it sort of depends. There's this feeling that it's happening gradually. And one of the reasons for that is that when you ask young adults, emerging adults, what is it that makes you an adult? Arnett reports something called the Big Three, is accepting responsibility for yourself, making decisions by yourself, and becoming financially independent. And those things happen gradually. So he says it's not surprising that feeling would also happen gradually.
Yeah.
A little thought pops into my head, and culture rolls along. So in one sense, it's change, a lot of change we're experiencing.
Yes.
But in another sense, it's quite stable, because and I say that in relation to other generations like the Depression years, or First World War, Second World War, the 20th century. Right. And they were huge ruptures in that. So an 18-year-old, I've got nephews, they're 18, 19, 22, they would have all been at war.
Right.
And that would have changed a whole lot of things, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So I guess I just was saying that, you do get these things in and through history that are really rupture something, that those dimensions you just mentioned are forced.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe a war would destroy emerging adulthood.
Yeah. And I say that because there's some talk now. I'm looking around of countries, not in New Zealand, but I think Mark Sayer made the comment within 5 years he thought Australia would reintroduce compulsory military.
Well, and it's already happening in Europe. There's already 5 countries that are
so not to sing, but those things start to then force these things, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
And you'll often have different things mark that. And some people will have a moment. I can clearly remember a moment. I was locuming in Australia in a hospital, and it was a place called Port Macquarie, which is a couple of hours up the coast from Sydney, 4 hours up the coast. And it was it's a hospital where those of us who were medical officers there would be the only person on. You'd sometimes overnight be the only doctor, and you'd have others on call, but you'd be the only person present in the hospital. And someone came in respiratory distress, and I had to actually make the decision to paralyse them so that we could intubate them and do the breathing for them. But that's a very big move, because if you paralyse someone and you can't get the tube in, then you're either bag and masking them for hours until an anaesthetist comes in to do it, or it's quite a... It's quite a bit, but I remember going, no, this is serious enough. We have to do it. Called for the meds to be given. The nursing staff were brilliant. I mean, they were kind of mopping my brow the whole time and taking my pulse.
Oh my goodness!
But sort of did it. Managed to get the the tube in. We got him stable through to ICU, a young guy, and he was discharged the next day. And the guy from ICU came around and sort of said to me, "Hey, well done on that." He joked with me. He said, "Oh, you went for a slightly narrower tube. Were you not backing yourself to get a larger one in?" Sort of thing. He was ribbing me a bit. Yeah. But I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm an adult now." Like a kid wouldn't have done that.
I just made an adult decision.
I just made a
serious decision.
A serious decision, and it was kind of like the weight of it was present right through the moment of doing that. And so I think sometimes those things will start to change how you're viewing that sense of self, that self.
Because my scenario is not as dramatic as yours, but I was going to go on a road trip with my wife. We were 24. Still living in Canada, and I was telling my parents having dinner, we're going to go to Nashville to visit some friends. We're going to drive there from Halifax, which is like a 3-day drive. Yeah. And they're like, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. No, what are you doing? You can't do that." And I remember I was like, "No, Mom, I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of what I'm doing." Right. And I noticed that, and then in that moment, our relationship was completely different.
Sure.
She was like,
she realized.
She realized it's like, "Oh yeah, that's right. You're married. You're in your mid-20s. Yes. Yeah, it's different."
Yes.
And we have never had a situation like that ever happen again.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we need a psychologist or a sociologist here to sort of say that's probably as much a life stage that's changing for your mum than one that's changing for you.
Yeah.
Right? There's two things going on there.
Yeah.
There's you sort of going, "No, I'm individuating in some particular ways," but also there's a letting go aspect there too.
Yeah. Because there is that dimension of parents helping in the process here, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, I know when I was pastoring, I watched this too, the sense of parents being quite strong with their kids of wanting to shape their Christian worldview.
Yes.
I mean, you've got Christian education, and then what you see and through that process is actually a bit too heavy-handed.
Sure.
And there are all sorts of reactions with that.
Yes.
So I'm not sure we do a great job in churches about helping parents do this stuff. I don't know.
No, well, I mean, look, I'll recommend a couple of books but later on, but one that I'll just throw in the mix now because I actually don't have it with me. I went hunting for it this morning. I must have lent it out. Yeah. It's called Growing With, and it was actually written by my supervisor, Stephen Argue, and his boss actually, who heads up the Centre for the Youth Institute at Fuller Theological Seminary, Cara Powell. They wrote a book called Growing With, and it's a book for parents through the teen and then the emerging adulthood years, and it's really great. I had to read it, but as I was reading it, almost every night, it took me a few days, I was reading it alongside another couple of books, and every night I was saying to Jules, "This has been so good to read this book now. I'm so glad I had to read it." Just as our oldest turns 12, 13, right into those sort of years. So Growing With by Cara Powell and Stephen Argue, I'd recommend that to people who just want to know some stuff.
All right, that's good. If I remember, I'll have it on the screen. If not, then just search it on Google.
Email me.
Let's go to the last one, and then we'll kind of go a bit deeper.
Yeah. Okay. So look, won't dwell too long on this. They overlap with some of the others, so this overlaps a little bit with self-focus, but possibilities and optimism. Okay. So it is a time where you haven't fully burnt any bridges, and you're able to make some pivots like I did out of medicine into theology, or doing an internship at a church, and I wasn't married at the time. I think if I'd been married with a mortgage to pay, I would have thought a lot more seriously about it. Still might have done, might have done if the Lord was saying it, But you're able to make some changes and go, you know what? I've started this degree at uni. I'm halfway through it. I really don't like it. Friend who sort of had done an apprenticeship and then realised, hey, actually, I don't want to be outside rain, hail or shine. I want to be able to pick and choose when I'm enjoying or not enjoying bad weather. I'm going to go and do something different. And you can make that change because you don't have the sort of dependence or the longer term responsibilities that make that harder to do. And it's also a time of optimism. You're really optimistic about your future. And often unrealistically so, and sometimes that needs to be gently pointed out or journeyed with emerging adults as they go on that sort of winding road of actually realising, it's one of the things I'll often say when talking in church settings, is that, God doesn't owe us an amazing job. He doesn't owe us a job that's going to push all of our creative buttons or use all of our, very apparent skills and talents and all of that. If we get to do that for a season, that's awesome, and we're very grateful to him for that. But I do warn people, and I've had to walk through seasons of this myself, where God will ask us sometimes to do something just really mundane, and perhaps for a really long period of time, simply because he's asked us to. And so, again, some of that optimism is culturally kind of inflamed, if you like, or the fire to that is really stoked. That, what's that line? Find a job you love and you'll never work another day of your life. Was there something like that? Where if you do something you love and you'll never feel like you're working any day of your life. Well, I just don't think that's biblical, to be honest. Yeah. There's lots of ways we could unpack that, but one of them is to actually say, you're a generation now. The generations now, but mine too. I'm young enough to, remember early sort of seasons of things like where American Idols are made overnight and MasterChefs are created in an instant, and this happens and that happens, and that phone call from Simon Cowell is it could be happening any time. He might be there to say you're being catapulted into this world, this job, this life that's incredible and amazing. And so I think I want emerging adults to be optimistic. It's a time of life where you should be optimistic.
So that touches on
to temper that alongside
that touches on these
obedience.
Sort of cultural myths, doesn't it? I mean, there are a variety of slogans and phrases and I know when my daughters now are in their 30s, they're married, have kids.
Yes.
But I remember through that period of knowledge economy and all that dream and all the rest of it. And I don't think we were sort of critical enough to kind of see it. We were caught up in, you can do anything you want. Mm-hmm. And it's a lovely line which sort of suggests to our kids. Now, they all pointed in certain directions and have, found their careers quickly, but their husbands didn't. Mm-hmm. But I just wonder about that culture myth. Well, is that true? I don't know if it is true.
It's the theme of probably 75% of Disney movies.
Yeah, I know, but it's sort of you can do anything you want. So there's this sort of false reality.
Yeah.
That
even if you're a snail, you can be turbo and win the Indy 500. There's this.
And so there's a sort of recognition.
It's in their mother's milk, Graeme. Like they're getting it. They're getting it in every direction.
Yeah. So it can lead you down a really long. And I'm not now on reflection. I'm going. Actually, I don't think it was great advice.
Yeah, you can do anything you want.
No, I sort of think so I'm a little bit of...
Well, because it's not true.
Our girls was, we did do the work of sort of what are you good at and what do you like doing?
Yes, yep.
I think was a better way.
Yeah.
Because that's often going to be aligned to what you will find a degree of value and richness in. Yeah. Well, I don't even want to use the word success, actually.
Well, I remember being...
I think that's unhelpful.
I remember being in late high school and realizing, I think the ship has sailed for being an astronaut. I think I should have taken pre-calculus if I was going to be an astronaut. And then as I got to university, I'm like, I'm probably not going to be a doctor. Yeah. I remember having those thoughts of the older you get, you can pivot, certainly, but the pivoting gets a bit narrower and narrower because you just don't have the bandwidth at the time, or there's responsibilities that are on you. You have things you need to do. You have a sense of calling narrows things down massively, which is huge, and which is actually a blessing in a sense because it helps you focus in a whole lot more.
Yes.
And kind of, I don't know where that fits in with these five, a sense of calling.
I think emerging adulthood and moving into adulthood is just, it's really one kind of series of foreclosures after another. It's actually going, that door is closing now.
Okay.
And that door is closing now. And that door is closing now. When I gave my oral defence, and Fuller is great, they do a very gentle defence of your doctorate. Your Doctorate of Ministry is very gentle. And I had a couple of friends who had suffered through PhD defences in other places, especially from people in the UK, just going, wow, I was absolutely roasted at mine. Mine was a very gentle affair. I got to invite some friends and family along to witness it, and we just had a chat, not unlike this. In fact, this has probably been tougher on me than my oral defence was. It was great. But one of the questions my supervisor asked, he says, have you got any room in the way you talk about emerging adulthood for lament.
Yes, I was going to, yeah.
Again, I'm trying to say these things aren't all negative.
Yeah.
There are positives to them. But it was a great question. And my two, I had Nathan McClellan and Donald Goodall were with me, two former colleagues from Venn. I haven't been at Venn for a couple of years. But they were there too. Because they'd walked alongside me for so much of it, and much of it pertained to the fellowship program that they were on. But the three of us were just nodding our heads going, that's just a really good question, that we need to make space for actually letting go of some of those things. And, maybe you probably didn't need to sort of write down astronaut and pop it on a little fire and let go of it. But some other
put
things
ashes under for Lent.
But some other things you might, you might actually have to say, yeah, I'm going to let go of that. I'm actually going to sit maybe prayerfully with this, maybe go forward for prayer one Sunday at church in your church congregation and have some people just sit with you and hear your description of something that you're realising might be something you need to let go of. And
I'll tell you what, there aren't that many altar calls that you see beyond like confessing sin and maybe accepting Jesus, or a call to ministry of like, hey, this is a moment for you to give up on a dream. Please come to the front. I was actually a part of a church service where we had a guest speaker where he said that. He's like, I think this altar call is for some dreams need to die.
Yeah.
And we're going to pray for you in that. I was like, dang, that's like such a countercultural message. I was like, that's because it's not optimism. It's not openness. It's a narrowing. It's a, yeah.
I mean, that's such a good piece of insight, because, the human experience and the arc of life is at various points. You do have to learn to let go of things. And there are parts of your life, it wasn't a big deal, but I used to play squash. And I got to a certain age at 57 and I thought, I'm going to have to let go of this. And I'll never play again. So, and I think that's part of life. So I really think that's a wonderful insight. There's just the sense of, and I did wonder when you were talking a moment ago about possibilities, the flip side of that is, when those things we look at we can't do, and there is a sense of lost dream, and and that's part of maturing and formation, isn't it?
That's right.
So what can churches do? Like, what's going on here? Like,
So this will often happen. You end up spending a lot of your time talking about the features of it. What I became most interested in was how can Christian communities disciple people through this time. It's a great time of life. It's a really, it's an exciting time of life. The options are there. There's a lot of exploration happening. It can be really rich, but it's got those other features as well. And so, how do we walk alongside people? And so, I came up with 4 or 5 things that churches could do, and they were make sure that people are getting a biblical anthropology, that they're actually they're truly getting a Bible's account of who we are and where our identity is, and all of those sort of things, partly because of those cultural things. That they need saints and exemplars. They need people in their lives. I sort of avoided the word mentors on purpose, but I guess that's partly what we're talking about. But I wanted to point to mentors from afar. So I think I've been mentored at least as much by people across the centuries and across the planet through the books that I've read and the people that I've drawn alongside. I've been really grateful for things like podcasts and other things that just allow you to sort of sit at the feet of somebody that you'd never physically get to do that and just learn from them, learn from their teaching, those sorts of things, men and women all over the place. Fuller provided me some of those people, the papers that I took, and some of the profs there were amazing. My favourite one, I got to see her at graduation as well, and we connected again. So people like that, but also people flesh and blood, people who are in your life, people who can hear your confession, actually, people who can know you well enough to correct you on some things. One of the sad things coming out of the literature is just how few older adult friends many emerging adults have, that they haven't been introduced to that many friendships from people their parents' age. They only really have their parents of that age. And again, I think churches can do this better, but we've got to be careful, I think, about the generational sectioning out of people where, youth goes down for all services and then these people sit here and kids' churches over here, and actually making sure that there is some cross-pollination of ideas and relationships there. Experience and encounter was another one. I actually pinched that from David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock's book.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Faith for Exiles.
Yes.
That book was really great. Yeah. And in that, they were their first feature of young adults. They were writing that book more or less looking at millennials, but those who had stayed in church were ones who were given opportunities to really experience and encounter God for themselves in particular ways. And again, they were neither too blindly celebratory or condemning a real focus all the time on experience, but they were sort of saying, people need those Easter camp moments. They need those moments where they actually say, hey, God met with me in these particular ways. And it can happen when you're just gently invited forward to let go of a dream too. It doesn't have to be that big, was that God or was that just the fact that there were 5,000 people under the marquee and the atmosphere was like this or that? In a variety of ways, but given opportunity to really meet the Lord.
That's what Pentecostal churches do very well. My mom attends a church in Halifax that even before the message even happens, there's like a moment, altar call moment just for prayer in general. And for people, they have a whole prayer team during the end of the worship, the music set. And I was like, whoa, the service could be over. Benediction could come right now. That'd be great. But no, then a whole message came again. And then it was just a whole thing. And I was like, you know what, that experiential kind of praying for somebody encounter, in that context, speaking in tongues is just like, you know what, that's like solidifying. That's very solidifying for people. Yeah.
I think those opportunities they're really necessary.
Yeah.
I'd sit alongside that. Some young adults who grow up in those sorts of environments are actually finding themselves drawn to more liturgical services and actually meeting the Lord there too. So these two things are happening sort of side by side. I know Mark Sayers has spoken to this a bit as well. The sort of you've almost got these two things developing at once. Yes, people are sort of doing. They're also going, man, you know what? I just sat through an entire Catholic Mass and I've never been more moved. I can remember the first time going to an Anglican church. We've been going there for about a decade, but I'd only been an Anglican about 20 minutes, and I sort of sat through a formalised Anglican service. And I was just like, this is amazing, like the richness of the words that are being repeated. Now, they can get to a point where you're just doing them rote and they've lost their meaning, but for many people they don't, and the encounter is happening there as well.
What I find, this is digressing a little bit, what I find is like my evangelical charismatic background going into those liturgical environments.
Yes.
It almost enhances it a little bit. I don't know, because I would say Jonathan, Graeme, and I have talked a little bit about Eastern Orthodoxy, and then I would push Jonathan and say, well, why aren't you Eastern Orthodox? Because I don't think it would be good for my kids.
Yes.
Because they don't really cater at all to that kind of development beyond just what's happening in the service.
Yes.
And I'm like, because I can actually appreciate that tradition, I think, so much more from where I'm sitting.
Yes.
Because of that history of that experience and that encounter. Not to say that doesn't happen in those contexts, they certainly do. But I knew so many friends who were Catholic who had no relationship with Jesus whatsoever. And it was just a rudimentary thing that they were brought along to. And I'm like, well, when I go to a Mass, I'm like, this is amazing. This is phenomenal. I want to raise my hands. I want to say amen,
I think James K.A. Smith, so James K.A. Smith wrote their book, Thinking in Tongues, Pentecostal Contributions to Christian Spirituality, I think it is. And he would say that, he drawing on Charles Taylor's work, would say disenchantment is one of the things that really marks modernity. And in some ways, aspects of postmodernity, although that's sort of shifting, and you get a sort of a re-picking up of spirituality, quote unquote, and perhaps a re-enchanting. But I think what the Pentecostal impulse does, he says one of the Pentecostalism's gifts to the Christian church ecumenical is to recharge, that the earth is charged with God's presence, that the Holy Spirit is everywhere. So the re-enchanting kind of background that you had meant you would go into a service like that looking for where's God present? Where's he alive? You probably weren't thinking that, but you've just been attuned to look for God wherever and however he turns up. Like the Holy Spirit's on the move through the liturgy, and you're able to see it. Perhaps some of those friends you're thinking about are still in quite a disenchanted way of thinking, even about the liturgy that they're reading more as an intellectual exercise, perhaps. Or
perhaps, I don't know.
I mean, in a book by Sarah Coaxley, a formidable English theologian. She brings those two ideas, but traditions, the charismatic and the contemplative, and she brings them together. So I think there's a complementarity about
Richard Foster did something quite similar.
Right.
Yeah, he said that what Quakers are doing in silence, he thought Pentecostals were doing in tongues.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. He just thought
in fact,
those two things were...
You know, we had Mary Kate Morse here, and I stayed with him when I was in the US, but just in the conversation, there's a real spirited languages. Is about kind of waiting on the Spirit, which for Pentecostals is very familiar.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a connection here. Yeah.
So
a couple other things.
Yeah, go for it. You do
so
your
thing. Another one was just cultural discernment. So teaching people to observe culture well. And I sort of, again, if I'm ever speaking at churches or to groups on this, I'll tell the story of being in youth group and being told the story that sort of almost like a modern day parable, that bank tellers don't learn to spot counterfeits by dealing with counterfeits. They use real money, and they have enough real money pass under their fingers that they know a counterfeit intuitively. Well, I read, I always remember hearing it and going, okay, that sort of makes sense, but maybe not really. And then sort of realising that, you know, the implication, of course, being just focus on read your Bible, pray every day, and you'll grow, and don't worry about focusing on anything else. But, you know, just focus on the true, and you'll immediately know the counterfeit. That was the moral of the story, or the moral of the parable. And I always remember thinking, I'm not sure about that. You know, counterfeits can come pretty close. Be worth probably talking about them every now and again, just so you know how to spot them. And it turns out to be terrible advice for people working in bank tellers. And I came across a guy who'd actually blogged on it, and he'd gone along to the Bank of Canada and actually asked them how they do. And he said, no, that we study counterfeits as well. Yes, we study lots of real money, but we study counterfeits because some of them are just so close that we've got to see where they've changed the watermark or the timestamp or the whatever it is on there. And I think we've got to do the same with culture. We've actually got to be saying, you know, that looks really, really close, but it's off by a couple of degrees. Let's have a chat about where that might be. If we were to overlay a gospel-shaped way of looking at the world over that, we'd see that, of course, some things agree. You know, well, counterfeits are never 100% wrong. Right? They're known for the closer they are, the better. So having those sorts of conversations with people around culture.
Well, any habitual liar knows that you don't just tell 100% lie. You tell a 99% truth, and it's that 1% that's off. Right. It's easy to get that 1% through rather than the 50%, right?
Yeah.
And so the same thing with culture. Like so much of because of the Christian heritage and kind of the interest that Christianity has within the culture because of Christendom in the medieval period and all throughout the Enlightenment and everything like that, even within the secular age that we're living in, there's still a lot in the culture where you're like, that sounds pretty Christian, but there's that little nuance, you know. Yep. And you can rattle off so many things, but we won't go into it. That's why that's really important. That cultural, look.
Is that the last one of those? Because I was going to ask a question about that.
You can ask a question about that. Oh, so one of them was leaving some of that space for lament and actually starting to introduce it in the way that you described. Joey was doing that. Far away.
Yeah, well, because I was thinking these things that you've talked about in terms of responding to the stuff, the various categories and things that you mentioned there. Because I'm thinking, you know, like as a church pastor, what do you think the steps are to move to in you know, making congregants aware, or parents and things, and various age groups aware of cultural things? Yes. What kind of things practices would need to be incorporated?
What could we do?
Yeah, because it's a do, isn't it? Like, what sort of...
Do we need new ministry?
What sort of initiatives?
Emerging adulthohood ministry?
Yeah, maybe that's the question. What sort of initiatives have you thought of around some of these things?
Yeah. So oftentimes, if had a chat about this, you've got a group, there'll inevitably be, like, I don't think I've spoken on this and not had, if the majority of people in the room are emerging adults, not had a majority of them just nodding their heads vigorously by the end of it. They're just all going, this, it's definitely a thing. Yeah. And so, people will sort of jokingly say things like, hey, can you do this again tomorrow night? And can I bring my mum? Because they find it extremely validating to go, I'm not just a black sheep or someone who's missed the boat or somebody who, isn't getting my act together. This is actually a thing. There's this cultural phenomenon. And, again, I don't think we sort of celebrate it or go... Rather, I don't think we go, therefore we just capitulate to it and I take as long as I want to become an adult. But it's extremely a bit of a relief for them to find out that they're not alone in this. So the first thing when I'm talking about what these things that we can do, and I've mentioned a few of them already, but the first one is conversations like these. So I think the first thing to do, I think Graeme would say, a specific church that you're a part of, is to have a conversation around it, to get hold of one of the resources, one of the books.
Two of them. Do a reading group or something.
Do a reading group. Yeah. So here's just a couple of groups, a couple of books. If you... this is Jeffrey Jensen Arnett's, the third and latest copy. This just came out last year, Emerging Adulthood. And then this one here's, so that only came out last year, 2024, I think, or early 2025. And this one here is 12 years old now, but it's a really good one around just spiritual formation for emerging adults by Setran and Kiesling. Spiritual Formation and Emerging Adulthood. A Practical Theology for College and Young Adult Ministry. Cool. That was really, really good. That was 2012 though, so that's a few years old. They need to do another edition of that. I'm not sure whether it's on the cards.
So that's a good place to start. Pastor read like that and then go from there.
Pull a group together.
Let's read this together. I spoke at a church a couple of months ago and they did a Sunday on it. And I came and I spoke about emerging adulthood and we talked about some of those things, talked about some of the things we could do. And people were just like, yeah, great. If they weren't an emerging adult themselves, then they definitely had sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, grandchildren that were, and just really appreciated hearing about it. So that's the first one. The others that I've sort of mentioned, like teaching on a biblical anthropology and identity and some of those sorts of things at the time of life where doing some of those things really, really matters.
Just flesh that out. For our viewers, I know what you mean. But
biblical anthropology. What is a biblical understanding of the human person? Ian Provan wrote a book called Cuckoos in Our Nest. Ian Provan is at Regent College. He's an Old Testament professor there. And in the introduction to the book, he said the early church had to thrash out who Jesus was and thrash out Christology. The reformers had to thrash out soteriology. How are we saved? Is the church the intermediary for that, or is it sola fides, sola scriptura, or the rest of it? He said we're having to thrash out anthropology. Yes. What is a Christian? What is a human person? What is a human being? Where does identity come from? And Cuckoos in Our Nest shows how many of the eggs we're hatching in our Christian nests were actually planted there by another bird. And we've sat on them. We've sat on them and raised them, and we think they're of our own, but they're actually very unbiblical ways of thinking of the human person. So that's
a great resource. The name of the book again?
Cuckoos in Our Nest.
Cuckoos in Our Nest. That's a great resource, isn't it?
That's a great title.
That's a great title.
I like the metaphor. The eggs in our nest that we don't know that we're sitting on is like, oh my goodness, what are we hatching? Yeah. So I like that.
Yeah.
Really.
So hence the cultural discernment too, right? So another one that I mentioned, saints and exemplars. So talking about having mentors in our life. So actually, as part of a church going, are we running any events where people could bump into and start to make those natural kind of invite an emerging adult over for lunch, or actually start to get to know some people that are older and younger within your congregation.
There's a whole piece that you could sort of develop there about, churches are thinking about, how do we coach people?
How do we
and nurture people, and
how do we do that well?
Yeah.
And as much as you want these things to be just organically done, to be honest, they probably won't. Mm-hmm. And you do need to, as a pastoral team, you do need to have some intentionality. Mm-hmm. So it's like, we would love for older families to take some 20-year-olds to lunch or have them over for lunch with their young families. It's like, no, you might actually need to tap people on the shoulder and say, who do you have some sense of a connection with?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you invite them over 3 times this year for dinner? That's it.
I think that's great. Those sorts of things have come up. I think they're really great. My sister went to a church in the UK when she was on her OE, 2 decades ago. She's part of a church, and she went to ask them about home groups, and she said, "Oh, look, we'll take your name down. We'll call you when there's a space." She said, "Oh, that's a bit rough, And so, but they matched her to a home group.
Oh, okay.
That was the whole thing. They actually prayerfully matched people to home groups. Yeah. And she said she was initially a bit offended, like, I want to go and visit a few and sort of find out, Yeah. But she's still friends with some of those people because it was done so intentionally. So I think something now. The devil will be in the detail, of course, working that out. Yeah. The other one I mentioned, encounter, and experience and encounter. And the other one, the fifth of the main five, so the pre one is just have some conversations, and then the fifth of the running through those is what I've called stability and service. So offering people sometimes just the opportunity to think, what are the anchor points for you right now? Everything's up for grabs. You've moved from Wellington to Auckland to do uni. You've changed churches. You're in a new flat. What's going to be an anchor point for you? What are some aspects of stability going to look like for you in this time? Have a think about that. Have a think about that. Can we be a part of providing that for you? Can we help you with that? And service might be one way of doing that. And I realise that talking about serving in church can be fraught. There are churches that have overdone that. But one of the most amazing insights came from a 20-year-old on our program. And she said when she moved to another city for university, she needed a place where she would be missed. She said, because no one else really knew where she was or what she was up to. She said, I'm in a flat, but we can come and go. We do some shared meals, and we get along really well. But she said, I was a part of the church choir, but to be honest, I could text on a Sunday morning and say, hey, my throat's a bit scratchy, I won't be in. And the choir drops from 30 people to 29 and no one worried. So she volunteered to lead a group of 12-year-old girls on a Sunday morning because she said, I needed a place where I was turning up, and I was like, wow. Yeah. And so that's been, that made it into my thesis, so actually saying, where is a place where I'm a link in the chain that's required, that's needed. Yeah. And then I think the wrestle for those of us who are a little bit older, Graeme, those of us that might be, leading the churches is to go, emerging adults have got a huge amount to offer. How can we release them to be a part of that?
That service one is so important because we had a young guy, 21, 22 years old, who's moved to Melbourne from the church. And I had a good relationship with him. And I said, you need to find a church. Okay. That's goal number one. Yeah. And you need to serve. And I didn't think much of it. I recommended a church. He didn't like it. Okay. And so he went somewhere else to a church plant with some other younger but older people. And then 6 months in, he's basically the indispensable projectionist where the pastor sends his Word document and he creates all the slides on Sunday morning for the pastor. Awesome. And I'm like, that's exactly what you're describing. If he was not there, he would be very missed. Yes. And because of that, there's a deep level of accountability. He's got a good group. People would miss him relationally. Yes. And it all happened in 6 months of him moving to a new city because of that serving component to being a part of church. Yeah. And so he couldn't just ghost and just walk away.
There's an interesting little piece about that. It's the way in which, pastoral leadership will narrate that. Yes. Not as a manipulative way, we need you for service here because we've got to keep the machine going. No. The narration needs to be, I would think, one of actual discipleship. Actually, the reason we want you to serve is actually this is it will locate you. Yeah. It will help you grow. Yeah. Yeah. It's really. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point. Just about locating. I mean, it was something when doing the course that I've just finished here with students is just naming where you're located. Okay. Yeah. I think people quite struggle to name it. Yes. Where are you located? Where's your context? Yes.
So if there was an emerging young adult listening to this podcast, and if I know the statistics appropriately, probably 1/3 are between the ages of 25 and 35. And I know emerging adult starts somewhere around 18 and moves up into who knows where, early 30s. Yeah. What's one big piece that you would say to them? They want to be an adult, but they're emerging. They don't yet feel like it. What's one thing that you would just kind of leave with them as we're kind of closing?
Oh, look, I think I'd want them to know. I want them to know there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, of course, with the Christian caveat that we're all broken and in need of Jesus, blah blah blah. But actually, that pretty much you're doing great.
They're normal.
Now, normal. And there's a bell-shaped curve, and so if you've been living in mum's basement for the last 8 years just gaming, then perhaps it's time to sort of think that you've bumped out the end of the bell-shaped curve. But just that you're doing okay. Have some conversations with older people, people that you trust. Find just someone that you can have a yarn with. It might be that you've got some vocational overlap, or I can remember just sitting down with Julia, and I had started dating. We'd been seeing each other for a while, and I was bumping into that kind of rather stark reality that you're going to be changed in any relationship, and I wasn't enjoying that, and so that was kicking up all sorts of stuff. I bumped into a guy I hadn't seen since we'd been in a church together when I was a kid, and so he was at least a decade and a half older than me, and I said, can we grab a coffee? And I proceeded over the next hour to list all the things that were wrong with Jules, and that I didn't think this relationship had legs if she didn't change. And he just puts his coffee down, 4 words. He said, "That's all you, bro. Like, that's all on you. Like, you've got to change that. Like, this is everything I've heard, all these grizzles, all of these complaints are you needing to change." And I sat there kind of feeling like I've been slapped. Right? But my next reaction was just like, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Like, how great that somebody who's known me since I was a kid would just say, "Hey, mate, you need to change that."
Yeah,
And so he and his wife ended up doing our pre-marriage course in counselling, and we just had a great time with them because they were, they were straight shooters, and they were great fun, and they had a great relationship themselves, and we got to see that. Now, it won't always come as a tune-up like that, but just have some older people in your life who can speak some encouragement into your life, don't feel bad that you have to confess that there's some aspects of adulting that you haven't quite got right. There's a slide I'll often put up that shows what adulting feels like, and it's a golden retriever holding its own leash in its mouth. Its collar goes down to a leash, and it's taking itself for a walk. I said, in some ways, being an adult always feels a little bit like that. You're sort of looking around for like, where's mum and dad? There are still things that happen to me now. I turned 52 yesterday, and there are still things that happen to me when I go, man, where's mum and dad? Like, where's the adult in the room?
Yeah.
Like, I'm it. We're the, if not 52, when, Graeme?
That's right. And that's the arc of life. You watch, and it moves pretty quickly. You're right down the leaving home and girlfriend and being married, but it moves through very quickly where actually the others have fallen off the perch and you're there.
Yeah, but the secular, I think the secular move is to say, yeah, I'm it. But the Christian move is to say, I've got another father, right?
Sure.
And I think, and you might not think, I got to make this payment, or I'm in debt here. Like, what's going on? And God's like, well, I've done that for other people. Mm-hmm. I've dealt with that. Mm-hmm. That's no big deal. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's really good. So,
so I guess in saying it, I'm like, if you're listening to this and late teens even, but through to mid-30s, going, oh man, I almost don't want to get alongside an older person and just confess that there's some parts of my life that I'm not getting right. Chances are the person you'll talk to will just nod their head and go, oh yeah, man, I wasn't getting that sorted for at least that long, and so just to not feel bad about doing that.
There's a relief in feeling normal.
Yeah.
And normalising rather than seeing it as a crisis, like I'm in this. That's helpful.
So doing it together, but making sure that some of that together isn't just with peers.
Yes,
that's older.
Yeah.
There's a lot of peer. Yeah. I think millennials probably do this more even than Gen X did, but they take almost all of their cues from their peers and don't really want to take it from the boomers. And look, there's reasons for that. Be wise about who you choose to do that with. I wasn't asking everybody to do our pre-marriage counselling. It was some people where I looked at and I said, I see some fruit in your life that I want to emulate. But don't feel bad that you'll be found out for not having all your adulting together because you're in good company.
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
We really appreciated you driving out here and hanging out with us. Yeah. And I've learned heaps. Yeah. And usually what happens is I reflect on the conversation. I'm like, man, I wish I would have asked that.
Yeah. And look, one other thing, I mean, as well as happy to come back anytime and chat about it, but also if people want to get in touch, they can just email me if they want more, some of the things that we've touched on, or that they're grappling with something, or they've got a group in their own church or wider community, or trying to get people together. They can just flick me an email. I'm just bloore.sam, BLOORE.sam @gmail.com. Flick me an email and I've got a whole doctorate's worth of resources to inflict on you.
You're like, I'm ready to help anyone out. Here we go.
Yeah, and look, I do think that there, some of the papers I did at Fuller.
Yeah.
I'd do a paper. I remember doing a paper on sexuality and ethics in Christian community, and I had a mate just go, "Hey mate, I know you read 35 books for that paper. I need 2. What were the best 2? I've only got room in my life for 2, so I do feel like I'm here to offer you the 2 books or the couple of papers that might help, or just a chat. So really happy to do that. Anytime.
Yeah, no, that's really good, really good. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for coming by.
Thanks, guys. See ya.